In 1992, video games both on consoles and on PC were about to receive a wave of full-motion video, thanks to the rise of CD technology, taking what was once little more than an arcade novelty into a mainstream and commonplace staple of gaming. Titles like Night Trap, The Seventh Guest, and Myst would lead the clarion call for the interactive movie, before that was a derogatory term, using controversial adult themes, like women using tennis rackets as microphones. This may have overshadowed smaller, more wholesome releases, like the Journeyman project from Presto Studios. Inspired by the success of 1991's Spaceship Warlock, which was a game, not a stoner doom metal project, yet the Journeyman project was released in 1992 for Macintosh and eventually ported to PC a year later. Although there were positive reviews for it, the port came with a lot of technical issues, mostly because of the original release's use of QuickTime for video compression. This led to it being re-released in 1994 as the Journeyman Project Turbo, which was a noticeably more functional game, but also still not that noteworthy of a game. After a much more successful sequel, Presto decided to polish up the Journeyman project one more time, to be more in line with the franchise. This led to another re-release called the Journeyman Project Pegasus Prime, and that's the one I played for no other reason than it was the most readily available. I do work hard on making the videos though. In the year 2318, when the people of Earth have finally gotten bored relentlessly killing each other and world peace is achieved, an alien race known as the sends a ship to the floating city of Caldoria to make contact with us and induct us into the symbiotry of peaceful beings, where all races of aliens can meet and hang out and talk about how cool space is and stuff. On this historic day, a guy named Gage Blackwood, who is simultaneously a young, disaffected everyman and also a member of the most significant and important collective that wields the potentially universe-ending technology of time travel. He shows up late for work for the 100th time, and that just happens to be the day Temporal Security Annex has been dreading. Disturbances in time are detected, and the events of the present are changing. I don't really get the scientific logic behind why we would know that time was changing and not have our memories of how time played out change. In any case, someone has gone back in time to 3 specific points and is intentionally rewriting history so that the aliens will not want to extend their help to us, mostly by instilling fear in the public and assassinating an outspoken advocate of alien-human contact, essentially undoing all the work that was done to achieve world peace in the name of xenophobia. Gage needs to travel to these different times in order to thwart the saboteurs meddling with time. The Journeyman Project Pegasus Prime has about as complex and interesting a story as its title suggests. This is a very traditional and cheesy but fun story that pulls from old pulpy sci-fi novels. It's not a deeply philosophical or emotional experience, it's a brief and lighthearted romp through time. For a game with such minimal gameplay, you'd think they'd take advantage of that to tell an interesting story, but aside from looking really cool, this plot is as basic and by the numbers as you can get. Time travel is pretty much my favorite plot contrivance, and to see it put to such limited use sort of bums me out. You're never sidetracked by anything. You never feel a connection or interest in any of these characters. The driving purpose of the story is find this guy and stop him. And then you find that guy and stop him. So good for you. You did the one task this game required of you and didn't experience anything else besides whatever distant pleasure that may have brought you. The closest thing I got to enjoyment to this plot was the sneak peek of the second game they included at the end. Gage from the future appears in a robot suit thing to Gage from the present and legitimately says,
"Quick, there's not much time to explain."
It feels so good to hear that. I hear a lot of things I can't say I care for. It's like this grating, awful noise that happens right now. That's weird. It's like it stops whenever I stop talking. Oh. TJP PP is a really simple game to control and comprehend. The only reason I can imagine someone having difficulties playing it would be because of a somewhat antiquated control scheme that requires you to use the directional keys to move, which is just uncomfortable because you do also need to control with the mouse. Every single movement you make in the Journeyman project is depicted in an animated FMV. This is very charming, but it makes all movement sort of stuttery and jerky. It all looks great, you're just doing next to nothing to interact with it. Most things you'll actually look at or touch are computer screens in order to solve puzzles. puzzles are actually pretty challenging, but that's because they are contextually absurd. Why would anyone make it so the synthesis of a poison's antidote or the prevention of a nuclear holocaust would require several logic puzzles of increasing difficulty? These seem like things you'd want to make as user-friendly as possible. There are moments where you can approach scenes differently by employing a lethal or non-lethal approach. This doesn't really affect the outcome of the game aside from your own personal feelings. I mean, do you care if these completely arbitrary points lean one way or the other? I have to admit, there is a certain glee I got out of exploring in this game, but it comes from a place of nostalgia and not from this game having interesting gameplay or intuitive controls. There's a lot of trial and error, and you will die a lot. This creates a fair amount of padding in an otherwise brief game that, were you better at games than I, could probably complete in 2 or 3 hours. I doubt you are as good as me though, because I got through- shit. They don't make them like this anymore. Well, nobody wants them to, but there is something so fulfilling and satisfying to see no-name actors ham it up in front of a green screen with 90s computer graphics surrounding them. It's the same feeling I get when I see a tragically outdated amusement park pre-ride video. I don't know what it is, maybe I respond to people trying their best to appear like professionals, but woefully missing the mark. That could just about sum up my entire adult life. Visually, I don't have a single bad thing to say about this game. It's goofy and old and the acting is spotty, and that's why it's so fun. Even the AI face that is supposed to be a robot needed to read her lines off cue cards. I've dealt with enough cold and distant women whose words I could not trust, so it wasn't all that distracting. If anything, it was kind of comforting. The old school atmosphere, visuals, and ridiculous soundtrack are the driving force behind my enjoyment of this game. So I'd imagine that most wouldn't find many redeeming qualities in this game unless they are already fond of this era. I hate to phrase it like this because I absolutely abhor reviews that latch on to one era of gaming as their unshakable measure of quality, like no generation could match up to the height of N64 or Super Nintendo. I think all generations had some gems and an avalanche of complete refuse, and the generation I grew up with is no exception, but that doesn't mean I don't find it endlessly charming. Like, we thought we had computer games on fucking lock. It wasn't gonna get any better than this. There is an arrogance to this genre of interactive movie that is so amusing to me. What the fuck am I talking about? I didn't have much else to say about the visuals because I love them. The Journeyman project Pegasus Prime was originally planned to be ported to PC, PlayStation, and Sega Saturn, but it wasn't until 2014 that it showed up anywhere other than a Mac. It's great to see a lost echo from a genre that's long been dead. I'm so fucking clever. Did you hear, like, the poetry in that?
It's pretty lame if you ask me.
Well, nobody asked you.
You literally just...
I wasn't talking to you.
Oh. Well, who were you talking...
Seriously? Are we seriously doing this right now? I'll start taking those fucking pills again. Thank you. I get the impression that the creators of Journeyman really wanted to do 2 things. Push the limits of PC graphics and make a fun game, which I think they accomplished in doing. Whether or not it holds up and is still worth playing is suspect, but it's a short, lighthearted space adventure that clearly has a ton of heart. I can tell as much from the goofy making of videos.
We're going to Macworld!
I'd recommend it for a substantial dose of nostalgia, but don't expect to be blown away by anything. Don't go into it with big expectations, and keep an open mind, and you at the very least won't be disappointed. I feel like I've said that to a lot of women in my life.
I'm sad.
Wake up. Wake up!